Hi folks, it's Mikel Weisser, staff reporter for Cannabiz News, and I am excited as can be to welcome you to this week's episode of The Keith Stroup Show, a weekly update on the politics of marijuana. Ladies and gentlemen, the star of our show, Keith Stroup, is the man who launched the entire marijuana movement, the founder of NORML, and he's in the trenches in Washington, D.C., fighting for marijuana freedom every day. So, if you've been keeping track at home, you know it's been a busy week in buds. How's it going from your end, Keith?
Well, if I had to judge it from what's happening right in Washington, I wouldn't be thrilled because, of course, we're dealing with Jeff Sessions and a lot of suggestions that there are bad things happening down the road. But frankly, I think the federal battle is kind of a distraction. My honest sense is that we'll outlive Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, and in the meantime, we are continuing to build support federally. I don't think we'll show any progress federally until Trump's out of office. We'll continue to make progress on the state level. But that doesn't mean there aren't important things happening, and there really are federally. Lots of good bills. I think there are 11 different federal bills now been introduced.
Well, this was an exciting week at the state level for marijuana reform. The two houses in Vermont went ahead and made a reconciliation and sent their bill to the governor. Arizona sent a hemp bill to the governor. Iowa and New Hampshire have bills that have gone to the governor. And in fact, in Iowa, they've already signed it. Probably one of the biggest stories that I saw last week was this study about aging and marijuana and memory.
Well, Michael, that's because you're getting to that point there.
Maybe a little prejudice in favor of that one, huh?
You know, as a 73-year-old, I can tell you it certainly is a study that I paid attention to.
Well, let's tell the folks at home a little bit about what we're talking about.
Well, you know, it was, as you pointed out in one of your pieces, and I think we need to be honest about this, it was a study of THC in the brain of mice, not humans. But what it tended to show was that it didn't just slow down the progress of aging and Alzheimer's and whatever. It actually seemed to go back and correct some of those things. In other words, it might be able to improve the condition of Alzheimer's and aging. Now, a long way from here to when we'll benefit from that, you know, in our real lives. On the other hand, that's not the first study by any means. That suggested that THC or marijuana generally is helpful to people who have memory loss or Alzheimer's or other conditions or it's similar. If nothing else, all of them show that it puts the patient at ease some, which I think you can understand. You know, they're getting high, they're relaxing, they're not as frenetic or worried. How come I can't remember who I am or where I am, you know? So on one level, I think without question, it's helpful to patients. Now, we need some more research before we know whether it's going to help us cure Alzheimer's down the road. But it would be ironic if, in fact, the drug that is famous for Cheech and Chong and stoners and, you know, we can't remember our last name, we're sitting on the couch eating pizza, that, in fact, might end up helping us cure a terrible disease like Alzheimer's. That would be wonderful indeed.
It's an amazing development, and it reminds me that back in 1999, the federal government applied for a patent on marijuana for therapeutic uses, and one of those uses was being a neuroprotectant.
Oh, without question. The early research showed in a number of studies that for MS patients primarily, but it also had some Lou Gehrig's patients and other nerve disorders, that it wasn't just that it helped with the symptoms, but it seemed to actually help regenerate the damaged nerve endings. Well, that's incredible. You know, that's like the beginning, the first step of a cure for a disease. So, you know, I'm delighted that we're continuing to get more positive research in that area. I trust once we get beyond the Trump administration, we'll have a federal government that will encourage marijuana research, not discourage it. Right now, almost all of the really important stuff is coming out of Israel or other European countries. Now, I'm delighted that Israel has taken this on because they really are the world leader on it. But it's a shame that we're not doing more on our side.
It's true. I tell you, there's a whole lab full of mice in Israel that are saying, hell yeah, keep researching. But that's a good news. Now, you were mentioning that Jeff Sessions has been in the news this week there in D.C. What's this new thing he has called mandatory maximums or something like that?
Well, it's kind of like, if you remember, there was a time under Ronald Reagan in the mid and late 80s where we got into this. If it's a drug offense, we want to lock them away as long as possible, and if it's a second offense or a third offense, for life. And then the Congress got into the battle, and they started passing these laws that said if it's your second or third offense, then the judge cannot sentence you to less than, and they filled in the amount, and it was like 20, 30, 50 years. So what we ended up with was, of course, our prison population exploded, but it didn't explode because of violent criminals. It exploded because we were locking up largely nonviolent drug offenders. Now, I'm not saying they were all nice people, and I'm not saying they were all smokers. They weren't. They were primarily people who were in the business. They were growing or selling or whatever. But most of them were totally nonviolent. I mean, even during Prohibition, come on, let's have some proportionality here. And there was no reason any of those people should have gotten more than 2 or 3 or 4 years. But a lot of them got far more than that because of mandatory minimums. Well, under former Attorney General Holder and President Obama, they really turned that around. And frankly, I'm sure it's because both of them were black men and they were aware of the incredible damage these drug laws and mandatory minimums had done on minority communities, especially because of drug offenses. So they turned that around and said in a memo to U.S. attorneys, said, don't go for the harshest penalty or the most incriminating offense. If there's no violence, let's try to come up with something that doesn't involve a mandatory minimum sentence. And again, it wasn't just that they were being sympathetic to these poor people who were going through their process, but also they were trying to come up with a criminal justice system we could afford in this country.
Right. Let me throw in some statistics. This memo that you're referring to, the Holder memo, was from 2010, and since then, we've had over 30,000 prisoner reduction in federal prisons around the country. But Jeff Sessions, in reversing that, caused Eric Holder to comment, we had called our program Smart on Crime. This is dumb on crime. Can you give us an idea of why this would be a bad idea? I know, from my personal experience that...
again, I think that the common values we share in the United States includes that all of us, 99%, think violent crime is bad and violent criminals should be locked away. But that doesn't mean that status offenses should be treated as if they are deadly offenses. And that's like parking offenses or, speeding offenses or possession of an ounce of marijuana or whatever. There are lots of these people who are locked up for incredible amounts of time because they had 2 or 3 of these essentially negligible offenses, but they were piled on top of one another. And that's the way the mandatory sentences worked. If it wasn't the first offense, then you fell into a certain category. Now, I think this is going to backfire so bad on them. I mean, I know in the short run they can do what they want, and Jeff Sessions' friends who own private prisons can get rich again for a few more years. But I can't imagine this will come out helping the Republicans or Donald Trump at all. It's not a popular initiative.
To give people an idea of what this is like these days, we recently had a case in Louisiana that you had communicated through the NORML networks where a man who was possessing 18 grams of marijuana was sentenced to 18 years, and then the state legislature upheld it.
Yeah, and by the way, wasn't that a nice kind of a round 18 grams, 18 years? Apparently in their mind, somebody must have thought, maybe the original judge or maybe the legislature, that every gram of marijuana you have, you must serve a year in prison. I don't know where the hell that came from, but it was the stupidest thing I had heard in years. Even in the bad states, Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma, man, that's pretty tough. But again, it's because they had stacked on 2 or 3 previous offenses. I'm not saying the guy was a Boy Scout.
No, he had a drug offense a gun offense a few years earlier.
That's right.
And that's what they used to say that he was a habitual criminal.
Well, and, in some ways, that's what we have to be careful. The nonviolent drug offenses that he had should not be counted along with those gun offenses. Look, if he had 2 or 3 gun offenses, then I'm not going to care too much myself about it. But that's not the case here. You had a guy who essentially was put away for 18 years because he was a marijuana smoker. Jesus.
It is horrifying. Shout out to this week's sponsor, ultratrust.net, for their support. Rocco Beatrice Sr., the founder of UltraTrust, is one of the nation's foremost experts on asset protection. His articles can be seen in USA Today, ABC News, CBS News, Fox News, and many more. Rocco can help you protect your assets from seizure, creditors, legal actions of all kinds, and hide them from prying eyes. Visit Rocco online at ultratrust.net, where you can download his free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn numerous ways to protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net, ultratrust.net. So, working our way around the country, let's see, what else do we have? This week we saw some sad news from my home state of Texas. Going to take my hat off, reverence to Texas. Just like the Sunbelt sister, the state legislature of Texas ran out the clock on marijuana reform to the heartbreak of millions this week. They had everything. They even had a jingle on the radio for one of the bills, a decrim bill.
Oh, yeah, they're very well organized in Texas. NORML, in particular, has 5 or 6, maybe more, state groups working around the state. It's a big state, and they're really good. They have been at it for a number of years, so they don't just go out and march on Million Marijuana March Day. They spend their time working with the state legislature, and by now, we have our own friends in the legislature. We know there are some other people who aren't our friends, and they're still standing in the way, and that's why the time ran out this year. It wasn't a matter of time running out. It was that we didn't have sufficient support to get one of our bills approved before they adjourned. But we're a lot closer than we ever have been before. It's a much bigger issue in the state, statewide, the media. It's no longer, it's not an issue people laugh at in Texas. They now openly discuss the merits and demerits of prohibition versus legalization. I think it's wonderful. When we started NORML in 70, Texas was the worst state in the country in terms of the sentences they were giving out, 20 and 30 years for possession of an ounce or an ounce and a half. So to see that state, there are 3 or 4 cities in the state, I think, that have already decriminalized locally, and now the legislature's not far away. So I would imagine by the time the next legislature comes back, I think that's one of those states where they don't meet very long every year. But
they actually meet every other year, so they won't have another chance until 2019. I want to take a second. Hats off to Texas NORML chapter director Jax Finkel. The 2 days after their bills died at the state legislature, they were back out on the street with their 10th anniversary marijuana march there in Austin.
Oh, she's done a magnificent job, and so have several other people around the state. I mean, I'm really impressed with the quality of work coming out of a very difficult political environment. None of us fail to understand that if you can win in Texas, let me tell you, you can win in any place. Oklahoma, Alabama, Mississippi. Texas is only slightly more progressive than those.
Yes. And once again, to our listeners at home, I lived in Texas for 18 million years, or so it seemed. So I really understand how that feels. I wanted to ask you, so this last week, we had announcements from Arizona and Michigan about new initiatives. Now, I'm here in Arizona, state director, and have been in discussions about coming initiatives both from the radical community and from the industry. That project is not quite ready for discussion. So I'm wondering if in the meantime, if this week you could give us a little insight to what's going on up in Michigan.
Well, I will tell you first that I think they are dealing with the same problems you did in Arizona last time around, and that you will be again, which is there are serious people involved in the legalization movement in both states who have strongly held views about how legalization should shape, how it should be shaped. And unfortunately, sometimes those disagreements get in the way of actually ending prohibition. And I think Arizona was one example of that last time around. I think Michigan has had a problem for a number of years where they have a lot of grassroots activists that feel strongly about certain views, and then they have some people working on the state level who maybe want to compromise more. So I think in Michigan, I think they're going through right now a period where they're trying to work together, and that's something we should all applaud. I hope the coalition stays together. I hope it's representative of all views in Michigan. Michigan is a Midwestern state, so we're not going to pass a law in Michigan that might be approved in Berkeley, for example. It's just it's just the reality.
Or in Arizona, for that matter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. But I think it's terribly important that we break through in the Midwest with legalization. We've done it with medical use, but it'd be sure nice to win a state with full legalization.
I was talking with one of the organizers from MI Legalize, which is the campaign from 2016. The guy's name's Chris Silva. He sent me a copy of the initiative. They've got some really nice provisions in there. People are able to grow 12 plants at home. They're able to possess 10 ounces at home or purchase 2.5 ounces at any given time. And there's this provision for micro businesses to protect their caregiver network when they transition from medical to recreational.
By the way, as you know, in some other states, that's also, of course, a big issue, is how do we avoid being taken over by, as our opponents like to say, big marijuana, And most of us would prefer that we follow the wine model rather than the beer or alcohol model. And we have room for a lot of small producers. It just makes it more interesting. It keeps people in the industry who've been here for years taking great risks, without which, by the way, we wouldn't have had any marijuana to smoke. And like
the cucaracha.
That's right. I remind people that although we're about personal freedom, marijuana smoking is only incidental. On the other hand, I will tell you this. If there would not have been brave people willing to cultivate marijuana and sell it to us consumers over the last 40 years, you would not have a successful marijuana legalization movement. So we owe those people, and I trust we can find a role for them in the new legalized market.
I think we shall, especially when you have an awareness of it going into the drafting process. When I was talking with Chris Silva, he pointed out that in their negotiations this year, and MPP is one of the people involved, so there's national organizations and half a dozen state organizations, and Silva said that they looked at our failure in Arizona last year as an example of what not to do when it came to organizing.
Well, I think, by the way, and I'm sorry because, I have you and other friends in Arizona, and I know you all invested a lot emotionally in that. But in some ways, I think that's right. It's sort of like California 4 years ago when they first failed with or 6 years ago when they failed with their initiative in 2010, I think. We learned from that. I was sorry. It was disappointing. We wanted to win. But we actually did learn from that. We found out that what people were nervous about were things like adolescent drug use and DUIDs. And so we could focus more on answering those questions as we move forward. And as a result, California will come online next year, and it'll be a $6 billion a year industry just in California. It will double the national market.
All by itself, yes.
Yep.
Speaking of California, this week we got our first listener question mailed in from Ryan, who is in California. And before we run out of time, I definitely want to say hi to Ryan and hi to California NORML and get his question read on the air and see if we can get some answers for him. This is what he says. Greetings, my name is Ryan. I'm a California NORML member, student activist, and advocate for cannabis. My question to both of you is, what is your opinion of academic cannabis programs added to our public and university school systems? Do you believe that the federal or state government should provide funding for schools that offer these programs? And is there a bill that relates to this subject? If not, how do we start that movement? Put it on you, Keith. Do you got any answers for Ryan out there in California?
Well, there are a few colleges around the country. University of Denver is one. They have a professor of marijuana. I forget exactly the title, but he's really a good guy. He spoke at our Aspen Legal Seminar last year. But it's not just that school. They're at University of Massachusetts. They have a course now that I think Michael Cutler, one of the NORML Legal Committee lawyers, teaches. So around the country, what's happening is the left wing of the bar, those of us who are lawyers but who were maybe a little more lefty or liberal than some of the bar, over a period of time have been able to take the marijuana issue and bring it into the bar associations, bring it into the places that matter, including law schools. So yes, there are schools right now. I think, frankly, less than 6. I could be wrong. I don't think it's a big number yet. But who are offering courses for credit that have to do with learning the legal marijuana business. Now, some of them are kind of draped in the idea of it's a political philosophy or something, but not all of them. Some of them, I think the one at Denver, for example, is really focused on, if you want to get in this industry, learn the skills, and they will teach it to you. So I think that's a very good thing. And I would say this, I don't think it's a major part of the legalization movement as we move forward. I think what it is, the industry clearly wants well-qualified job applicants. So the players in the industry should support this kind of thing. And they did, by the way, the one at the University of Denver is actually funded by a law firm there in Denver that specializes in the marijuana industry. So I think that's what we'll see more of. Lawyers who are making money off of the new legal marijuana industry, put some money up at your law school you graduated from, and let's start training some young lawyers to come out and fight the battle for us. Where some of us are getting long in the tooth.
I love that suggestion, though, about cannabis lawyers putting back into the industry. Here in Arizona, I man the hotline for NORML. And at least 4 times a month, we have somebody calling in whose life has just been disastered because they've been arrested or raided or something. And it helps to have a network. This last year, Arizona launched the Arizona Cannabis Bar Association. And as soon as I got that directory, I started using it. So we really do need lawyers that specialize in this
Without
field.
question, Michael, I would say almost every day of my life, I get at least one email or phone call from some poor soul who's had his life interrupted and turned upside down for some marijuana offense. Occasionally it's something serious. Most of the time it's not, but their life is still being turned upside down. And I am delighted we have the NORML Legal Committee that we can often send people to. But I realize, look, the average person who gets busted doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer is a problem. So you really have to depend on appointed counsel and public defenders. But, right now, the mood of the country is not into funding those programs. So I think a lot of private lawyers are going to need to step up. I mean, every private criminal defense lawyer I've ever known takes a certain number of pro bono cases, because you can't hear these terrible things and turn around and walk away. You just can't. So, I'm proud to say that I think NORML does more than any other organization to help people who've been arrested. In fact, there's no other drug reform organization that even has a legal committee, I don't think. But we don't do near enough. It's too big a job.
It is a huge job. Just a reminder for our listeners out there who thought that fighting this marijuana reform is a noble, exciting, worthwhile goal, you are right. If you want to join the fight, check out the NORML website. That's NORML.org. That's about all the time we have for this week. I want to thank our host, Keith Stroup, and I also want to thank Ryan from out there in California. If you guys have questions that you would like to have answered, send them to the email there on the podcast player page, and we will do our best to answer it. Right now, this is all we have for the Keith Stroup Show. I'm Mikel Weisser. You've been listening to Cannabiz News, and thank you very much. Keith Stroup Show was brought to you by ultratrust.net. Protect your assets from seizure, creditors, and legal action with UltraTrust's Irrevocable Trust Fund. Visit ultratrust.net to learn more, and while you're there, download their free report, Managing the Risk of Loss, and learn about ways to legally protect your assets. That's ultratrust.net. ULTRATRUST.net.